Hello, Dr. Carol Blaney here, and I'm going to share with you some insights that have come together for me early this morning on Wednesday, May 1st. And these are insights that have accumulated from a lifetime, I should say a decade of serious work in researching physics unification, and my background's in chemical engineering. I'd like you to meet Nico, an elder kitten, just about a year old, and he's joining me today in this beautiful sunny BC, Vancouver weather. And hello, Nico. I love you so much. I really appreciate you. You give me so much joy. Best kitty in the whole world. This is a Sphinx cat, and it's a little bit chilly in the morning, so we have a little sweater on Nico. I made it. I always use pure cashmere on Nico because he deserves a soft feeling against his skin. Yes. Today I'm going to be sharing with you an insight that I had at 3 a.m. this morning, accumulating a lot of the diverse videos and books that I read have come together to finally start to make sense in a big coherent picture. At first, for example, when I would hear Terence McKenna talking about his repetitive visits in other worlds when he would take his DMT or ayahuasca, I love you too, kitty. It would strike me as odd. I would always, being the scientist, I would always say, well, that's just happening in your mind, and it's a dream. But do we really know what dreams are? And I would have an open mind. He was very, very intelligent and amazing and insightful about so many things that I just couldn't allow myself to discount his telling of the story that he would see otherworldly creatures when he went into these other worlds during his DMT experiences. And the detail that he would go into about how these elves and other creatures were playful, and it was difficult to describe because it was so multidimensional, and he would try to describe it by saying it was like a Fabergé egg. Everything was amazing and colorful. Well, okay, so that was one idea that actually now I'm going to say makes complete sense. And believe me, I have a good explanation because I'm the worst skeptic when it comes to strange ideas. I really want to understand. So number one was the Terence McKenna that I understand now. And I'm going to point out some points that different lecturers have made that at the time, I took notes and had an open mind, but didn't necessarily buy into it completely. And in the end, I will tie this all together. I want to keep this about 10 minutes. So then the second speaker that I saw was Neil Turok in a relatively recent talk. I think it was 2015 or maybe 2017. And in the middle of his talk, he spoke of the practically indisputable evidence that we now have that when the Big Bang began, that's what, when we extrapolate our data back, it clearly shows there was some sort of a Big Bang. Now, we don't know what happened before that, and please allow me to call it the Big Bang. I know a lot of people are against that, and they think that it's a big made-up story, but there is a lot of evidence for it. And so along those lines, in the context of that evidence, I'm pointing out that Neil Turok is disclosing or sharing the information that's pretty much indisputable, that says that there was, in the 10 to the minus 5th second of when you start time t equals 0 and go forward, in that before 10 to the minus 5 seconds, in a nanosecond time span, or approximately a few nanosecond time spans, there was a creation of what he calls sound waves created in the universe. And those sound waves then proceeded to evolve into vortices of stuff. And he clearly said vortices. Now, I'm going to correct his language. You see, a lot of people say sound waves, but if you look at our dictionary, and our consensus of what sound waves mean, that's not actually accurate, because you can't have sound unless you have human ears and air to carry that sound. And there was no air in the Big Bang. But my own personal theory that I've shared in other videos, and I'll continue on with today, where the universe is made of a fluid called ether of zero viscosity and infinite turbulence, which makes up the zero-point field. And I describe how during the Big Bang vortices formed. Well, this agrees with that. And when you have a lot of different minds that come to the same conclusion from vastly different viewpoints, you have to sit up and take notice. So he's saying that data shows, and that a lot of great physicists are saying and declaring and claiming and sharing, that vortices were formed. I say it was vortices that were formed in this etheric fluid. And it's what I've always said, and this just clarifies it. And it also clarifies to Neil Turok and a lot of these other physicists that need to use a different language, or at least clarify that they don't really mean sound. They just mean a vibratory pattern that creates beautiful harmonic structures like sound. And all human beings do have, almost all that can hear, do have this physical and visceral experience of sound. He could have easily have said color, because colors form beautiful harmonic patterns that form, they connect to our emotions and make us feel thrilled. And like, I'm looking at my kitty, and his beautiful eyes, green eyes, are looking up at me with such love. That's coming from the light. And that also is, you could have called that sound if you didn't have a name for it. But light is actually a more ordered form of this etheric vortice patterns that were formed in those few nanoseconds right after the Big Bang. So Neil Turok's speech also inspired me, and starts to clarify all this and bring it all together. What does it all mean? So keep Terence McKenna's talk. I'm sure a lot of you have probably listened to Terence McKenna, so keep his words in mind of visiting elves with DMT in other worlds, and reptiles are there. To keep that in mind. And then as reptiles and elves are some of the creatures, that's the best way he can describe it. So remember, we're using reptiles and elves and the word sound to describe things that are really undescribable in our human language, because we don't have access to these concepts every day. But I believe in the future we will, and we will start making words for these phenomena, and I might start proposing some words. So for example, the vortices that the physicists speak of that got formed in the Big Bang, I also call those vortices, because they are vortices, but they're not of sound. They're of etheric acceleration. And there's a vector field that describes this, that can describe this, and does describe it. So moving on, we've talked about the Neil Turok and the Terence McKenna. And then the third point, and there are three here, and then a couple more, but the main three would be the name Linda Moulton Howe. And she's very big in the UFO phenomenon, and she has a huge following. And my husband watches her a lot, and I sit next to him and watch along with him many times. And it is intriguing, all this talk about UFOs, and it's getting more and more actually in the news that we're, the aliens live among us, and they're not really aliens, but they may not be human, but then again, maybe we can procreate with these entities. I don't know. It's just kind of they're manipulating our DNA, so whatever. The point that she said that struck a chord was that she was interviewing a young girl that when she, actually it was a woman, I'm not going to mention the name, but the talk that she mentioned this in it had binary code in the title. So if you searched Linda Moulton Howe binary code, you would find this 2-hour seminar given at some conference. And then about in the middle of the 2 hours, around, it's either 1 hour or 1.5 hours, somewhere around there, she mentions this woman that she interviewed, that when she was 12 years old claims that she was abducted and brought into a place. And as I watched it at the time, I was thinking, okay, this is a dream. She had sleep paralysis and she was having a dream, blah, blah, blah. I've had sleep paralysis before and it's creepy. And you really do think you're somewhere else. So she had sleep paralysis and she was abducted and they treated her like an interesting piece of lint, she said, like not really that compassionately. And they had made a clone of her so that later, if her heart went out on her, because she had rheumatic fever as a child, they would be able to then put her spirit from her dying body into this clone that they would reactivate and make her have a brand new body without a heart condition. And I wasn't clear whether they did it there or they were going to do it. I don't really know how that, but sorry to say all this, but this is to help you find the excerpt if you're interested. The key point that this woman made that was being interviewed was that when she was 12 years old and she saw these big glass tubes with these clones inside of various people, including her own, she was told by this alien that, that they made her clone to be available later if they needed it, because they had created her genetically and she still had more work to do in this deep genetic body. And that she was also told, here's the point, that the universe was a symphony of sound, and that these sound waves interacted together, and that the human entities only existed, or not only existed, but existed in one set of these sound waves. And the other sets of sound waves were what are called dimensions above and below. They use the term, I think it was dimensions above and dimensions below, or realms above and realms below. And humans can't get to those realms because of the limitations of our senses. And that this isn't a real world, but it's mental, it's an experiential world that exists by existing, or our consciousness occupies this particular set of frequencies of sound. Again, they use the word sound, and I think that the reason humans and extraterrestrials or non-humans use the word sound is, again, because we're all connected. Because all humans have the visceral experience of sound, so that helps us understand it. But I believe we need to say like sound, because it's really the etheric acceleration, flux, vibratory patterns that are set into being like sound. And so you could consider our entire universe with all its realms above and below to be a standing wave that is vibrating, and it's a superposition of standing waves that one of them, say, is tuned to A440 in the same analogy. And that's maybe what another realm occupies, and then the humans are tuned at 432 hertz. That's a certain tuning on the piano where the A note is 432 instead of 440. Now, right now, the majority of Americans and British people use, I'll just say Americans use the 440 tuning system, but many wise people, and myself included, not that I'm wise, but I'm one of the people that also claim that the 432 is really what our body resonates at. And you can, as a scientist, you can say, well, our cell diameter is just a perfect size to resonate with the 432 hertz. And so because of that, our whole structure, our whole biology is built on 432 hertz. And in that sense, that's our realm. And that's what our senses were evolved to or created to sense And so we will only hear, see, feel, touch, and exist in the 432 tuning. But again, the 432 tuning is an analogy. I would say that here, the 432 sound waves actually are sound waves that are in sync with the human frequency of the etheric acceleration resonant pattern. And I'm sorry if you don't know these terms yet, but we're not a universe of vibrating sound only. That's one epiphenomenon of the universe, that humans hear sound waves in air. But the underlying thing that we are is vibrating ether. And that fluid, that zero viscosity fluid that becomes infinitely turbulent and forms vortices, which forms, some patterns are stable vortices, which in our link scale and our frequency set is what we see as light waves. Those are vortices that travel in a straight line as we measure them. And then those vortices, when exposed to curved space-time, just to get to the point quicker, I'll just say that, can loop around themselves and form into rings, because these vortices of light, as I've talked about in previous videos, actually suck in ether because they are flow patterns, and in order for a flow pattern to sustain itself, it sucks in ether, and that continues to sustain this particular form of a vortex. And when it goes into, it's normally stretched out and traveling in what we call a straight line with our instruments, but if it is superimposed upon itself in a tight circle, it forms another stable form that's so tiny that the tiniest one we're able to see is an electron, which is a toroidal shape, and it also sucks in ether. The ether flows into it and sustains its existence. And where does the ether go? It's not, as Einstein said, a singularity. It doesn't go to a point and disappear into the point. No, it looks like it's going into a point, but at a very, very small size scale, smaller than Einstein considered, but what I propose is important, it begins to go into its shape, which is a toroid, and it has many levels of curvature. I'm not going to talk further about that now, because right now I'm tying together some ideas. But the similarity between what I said with vortex flow or curved flow being the only flow of ether, because straight lines aren't really necessarily stable, there will be too much interference, and so it will end up going into a curved path, agrees with what Neil Turek said. So that was a real, like, yes, I'm on the right track. Another, because everything I hear in physics always seems to agree with my theory. So I know that what I'm saying is part of the collective. We're all discovering this together. And I'm not going to ever claim that I thought of anything. It comes through me. The idea is in the collective consciousness. It's coming through me. I'm sharing it dutifully, with passion, and Neil Turek and many physicists are finding it experimentally, and we're all in this together. I will give credit when I know someone did it, but otherwise I'm not going to say I thought of it, only because there's always someone else that thinks of things, and everybody that's ever thought of anything finds out that later, oh, someone else thought of that, so, but what I'm doing is I'm putting it together in this view. So what I'm seeing now, so how does this relate to what Linda Moulton Howe said? Well, the lady she interviewed said that the non-humans told her that the universe was made of sound. Well, that's the same thing. It's, again, they use sound, but they mean etheric vibration patterns, like sound waves, like ringing a guitar and having the string stably wiggle up and down and make the root sound, C, and then it makes the fifth above it, G, naturally, because of the way the string vibrates. It doesn't just go up and down, a string vibrating like that with two nodes on the end that don't move. It's not only that, but it also moves with not just a half a wavelength going up and down, but it makes a whole wavelength, and it makes many multiples of half wavelengths. So n times lambda over 2. And n can be 1, 2, 3, all the way up to infinity. All those harmonics form many, many sounds. And it starts with C, and then the G above it. And then let's see, I believe then the next one would be F above that. And then above that is probably going to be the E above that, which is the third. And then I believe over that is the 1, 5, 4, 3, 7, and then the set, which would be B above that. So, and then, and then you get your D, your ninth, and then you get higher harmonics above that, which would include the sixth, which is also called the 13th in jazz, and then further up you might get a flat 13, and further up you way up, like the very last one might be a sharp 4. So as the harmonics go up, they get more and more dissonant to the ear if you're listening to jazz music, and that's why simple songs just have 1, 3, and 5, and those are the first 3 harmonics, and with the 4, the F also. So 1, 3, 5, and 4. I didn't say that in the right order, but those 4 notes are the most harmonic, and then as you go higher and higher, they get more and more dissonant. But anyway, point being is, Linda Moulton Howe interviewed the lady that said we're a sound wave vibrating. Now, another thing that I'll point out now that Linda Moulton Howe's interview lady said was that the non-humans told her that because of this structure of the universe, if we, on this set of vibratory frequencies, do a certain thing like blow up a bomb, that actually disrupts the entire field of all frequencies. So you could think of it just kind of like, as in a simple way, as that the 0 point field with all its turbulent fluctuations, it's certainly going to affect all of those things. Well, within those, embedded within the 0 point field, are all the other frequencies as well. So they're all there, just our senses don't see them. Okay? So it's going to, she said that the non-human entity told her it would form a whole, which would then make everything collapse, including all the harmonics above and all the harmonics below, and our own harmonics. And so then everything would collapse, and space-time would collapse, and then this universe as we know it would cease to exist. An analogy with sound would be that if you have a string ringing perfectly in resonance forever and ever and ever, well, the more dissonance you put on that string, such as ringing notes that cause the perfectly vibrating string to get cocked to the side, or it might add to that, it might be an additive frequency that causes it to cancel itself, and so it starts to get less and less of a vibratory field, and then it starts to die out and not vibrate at all. That would be one way. So your string becomes, like if you're playing, okay, let's just say you're in an airplane and you hear a loud roar and you don't like that loud roar, so you put on earphones that play the opposite. The earphones are smart, they record the roar and then they invert the wave to the negative of that wave, so that whenever that wave is maximum, your earphones create a wave that's minimum, and then you add those together and it goes to 0. That would be a cancellation wave. So what we're doing is we're beginning to start canceling out our existence. So do you really want to do that? Do you really want to blow up things in outer space or on Earth to test your weapons? And then one day it's just like everything's falling apart. What's happening? And ting, 100 years go by and the universe ceases to exist. Or maybe it happens in a microsecond. I don't know what the time span is, but if you hit a drum and then you I guess I don't really know that much about drums as much. Let me think of something that I really do know. Just one of those Buddhist bells, that's like a long tube, and you hit it with a mallet, ding, and it just rings and rings and rings and rings. And so you could, let's just use the analogy. So that a long ringing sound of that that metal tube, let's just say it rings for 2 minutes, okay? And then maybe it rings with another minute that your ears just can't hear. So it rings 3 minutes. That's what I'll call the length of our universe. So that might be like some huge number, okay? Or 10 to the 42 years, whatever. So if you blow up an atomic bomb, would be the equivalent of your cat coming up to that ringing thing and putting his paw on it. What happens? It is like, and it stops. That's the end. And the only way you can elicit the vibratory pattern is to hit it again with the mallet. Well, we don't know if there is anyone there hitting it with a mallet. We could just be an anomaly of luck that our universe came into being. We do not know what's beyond that. But what we do know is if we stop ringing, we cease to exist, as far as I know, and other beings may come into being later, and yes, my soul may somehow survive. I mean, I believe that it does, but I don't know that for a fact. And it's possible that it might destroy all of our souls. I mean, we might just completely cease to exist, and the whole universe and the whole cosmic consciousness and you and me are one, and all that, the connection, the interconnection's gone. So I don't believe this. I know this. I feel it. I experience it. I'm convinced. I mean, you don't just have a eureka moment at 3 a.m. in the morning and have everything come together to you. And by the way, I do not do drugs or anything like that. I'm completely clean, okay? I have been given drugs in the hospital. I didn't really like them, though. And I've been given codeine, but those aren't hallucinogenic, and they just basically make you relax and be in a good mood for a little while. But then the next day you feel in a worse mood, you know? So, yeah, so I'm just not, I'm very susceptible to things, so I'd rather just not go there. Like, I would not want to do DMT because I just rely on people that are smarter than me that have done DMT, like Alan Watts and Terrence McKenna, and I learn from them. So let's see if I've covered all my points. So then, you know, I talked about Terrence McKenna, Linda Moten Howe, and Neil Turok's work, and then my own work, Dr. Carol Blaney, C.A. Blaney, I go by that. So ether plus the act of creation, that is the void ether, plus the act of creation, whatever caused the void to be non-quiescent, forms into a bunch of overlapping frequencies, which go into vortex patterns, which form light at various dimensions, I'll say. I'm going to say not various dimensions, at various frequency sets. And it's like an infinite number of frequency sets. Humans happen to occupy one. And one harmonic frequency set makes up humans. And our senses only pick up those frequency sets that we evolved to exist in. Okay, the light waves that we see. But there's light waves of other size scales that we don't have access to. But they're there, and it's right here among us, okay? The other sets make up other dimensions. That's the words that other people use. And I don't really like that term because dimensions is used for something in mathematics, and this is not that. It's related to that, but it's not precisely that. And all sets support the other. I think rather than dimensions, I like to call it harmonic frequency sets of the etheric flux. Now, that is a bit long, and I guess if you all agreed to call that a dimension, but you know what you're talking about, then that's good. Then, if you do nuclear reactions, not nuclear, but nuclear, just to be clear there, Bush changed the way everybody says it, but it is nuclear reactions, because it's the nucleus of the atom that you're altering, the nucleus with the protons and the neutrons and all the gluons holding it together, standard theory jargon. When you do destroy that fundamental structure, a lot of energy is released, which can destroy the space around it and the 0-point field and all the unseen frequencies that are there, frequency sets. Now, I wanted to also point out that, you know, it's always good to use analogies, So that once the person understands the analogy of, say, sound, which is an analogy for the vibratory patterns in the ether, that is, the etheric flux vector fields that form stable patterns over time in the ether, such as light and mass, which we exist in, and how we exist in the solfeggio frequency set. So we use sound as an analogy, but let me give you another analogy. It's also based on sound, but it's a little bit more accurate actually, and that is a radio. Now, when I gave you the analogy of sound before, and I talked about how if you have a tube of a certain length, that when you strike it with the mallet, it'll resonate at, say, A equals 432 hertz, the solfeggio frequency, and then that's known to kind of resonate with the human body and make you feel better, because it's the set that we occupy, and so it would affect us more. Now, let's just say that the human body, instead of being a tube that resonates at a single note, it's a wire that resonates, you know, a wire with an adjustable length, because you have a potentiometer that sets the length of the wire in the radio, which picks up various frequencies. So let's just say you tune it to 740 hertz on your radio station, and then it'll pick up the frequencies that are there. They're ubiquitous in the air. They're being sent by radio towers all over the city at 740 hertz, okay? And I just picked that out. I mean, maybe it's 740k hertz. I don't actually remember what the number is, but let's just say 740 hertz. So if our vessel is 740 hertz, you know, then we will only pick up the stuff in that 740 hertz frequency. And it's not exactly analogous, but it's very close, okay? It's the same principle, and that is that wire that picks up the 740 hertz picks up many, many patterns that are based on 740 hertz. So that 740 hertz has an amplitude wave that gives it, you know, volume over time, and also it might not just be a sine wave, it might be a beautiful pattern that repeats like a violin. You know, it kind of goes up and ooh, you know, and these repeating sounds have a particular pattern that gives the tone of the sound. So a violin has a certain beautiful like pattern that repeats, and then like my voice will have its own pattern, and that's how voice recognition works. It picks up your particular pattern that's going with your voice. So by changing the tones, you know, with the pattern and the amplitude, and also maybe you could even overlap onto that more patterns. You know, you have more than just one frequency, because you have the base frequency and then all the frequencies that are added to that, so that if this is your 740 hertz frequency, it might go higher and lower and higher and lower, and, you know, form these superimposed waves on top of that are other frequencies that determine what you're saying, the words that you say, the meaning of those words, you know, the language. And you can also send information with binary code. Well, binary code, since it's just on and off, could be transmitted from one realm to another. That would be the ideal way to communicate, because it's not based on a base frequency. It's based on information alone. And that's why, for example, Linda Motenhow reports binary code being transmitted to different people's brain. They write it down, then they decode it, and most of the messages are to beware, do not be fooled by Trojan horses of certain grays. Some grays bring tidings of great abundance, and they're really lying, and they're going to hurt you. You know, they don't really offer a solution to that. Like, how do you know which one's lying and not? But that point is that the binary code is transmitted between realms, but our realm operates on, I assert, solfeggio frequency, for example, and so our radio wire is tuned there. You know, that's what we pick up, that frequency, and so we see only the things that are in that frequency. Just like your radio, when you tune it to the 740 hertz, only sings or sends your ears a signal based on that frequency. But if you change the length of that wire, you'll pick up a whole nother dimension, a whole nother station, a whole, and so the analogy is that, say, if we humans exist at the 7, whatever number I gave you before, I should have used 432 hertz for my radio station. So yeah, so we're at the radio station of 432 hertz, but other radio stations might be out there that operate at 431 times 10 to the minus 42 hertz, or 434 times 10 to the 400 hertz, like all levels. There's probably an infinite number of coexisting realms or dimensions that exist on top of us. Okay, and they are there. I mean, the 0 point field looks turbulent. There's all this stuff going on, but those are signals that belong to one or another of these realms. And our realm, what our instruments measure, what our senses measure, are in our realm, our station, our wire, our length of wire, our set of frequencies within which we operate. And these frequencies are all related to one another because they're all harmonics of a root frequency that is us, humans and mammals, and on this earth. What I don't know is, do other animals that have different cellular structures exist in different frequencies? And I don't know. I'm not a biologist, so I don't know if all cells are about within that solfeggio range, or are some cellular structures smaller, and maybe those animals can communicate with other frequency sets, but that remains to be determined, and it's not the main topic of this talk. But I wanted to give the radio analogy because I feel like that's even more relevant and easy to understand if you understand how radios work than the analogy of striking a single tube. But the single tube analogy, if you've studied music, would then make more sense to you. And then lengthening the tube would emit different frequency sets. And the 432 and its harmonics would then make the human being feel most pleasant. So I wanted to share that, trying to help you understand the depth of the physics eureka that I've had and that many others are having across the planet in this decade, in this century. Now, I will also, just icing on the cake, mention Tibetan Buddhist monks and other monks that meditate and chant elicit a vibratory frequency in their body which takes them to a trance state, which alters their senses. They report of seeing various things in these other dimensions, which again I defined as etheric acceleration flux patterns that are vibratory and stable, the harmonic sets of etheric flux acceleration. So these monks see these other dimensions, and shamans with their drum beating or their medicine that they take are taken into trance states, and they are able to go into other worlds, meet with other beings, communicate, receive wisdom and insight. My theory is that they're now overriding the limitations of the human senses. That's what the trance state is. It's being able to not be limited by your senses like we are in everyday beta consciousness. By beta, I mean that your brain waves are firing at the normal beta, aware, alert, busy state, or even in the alpha state when we're just receptive, and like when you're watching television, you're relaxed and receptive, and the information comes into you. So it's even more than that. Like some of them are actually in beta, or they might be in delta. That's the fastest beta and the slowest delta. But whatever altered state they're in, it's not everyday consciousness, and because of that, their senses are either turned off or toned down, but they're able to access these other frequency sets of the etheric acceleration flux patterns, those stable resonant fields around us. And within those fields is where other entities thrive and exist, their consciousness is, and they can see us more than we can see them. But I believe that these monks that go into certain trance states can see these other entities, just like Terrence McKenna can see them when he takes his DMT. And then shamans, they either beat their drum to take them into trance states where they can visit other realms and meet with other beings that give them wisdom to take back, to help them heal their client or heal themselves, for example, or have new insights about how to handle certain problems that we feel are insurmountable, but there actually is a solution to it. And also some shamans that aren't in the U.S., a lot of times they'll use ayahuasca or other medicinal materials to go to these other realms and to visit with the beings that live in the other frequency sets, that then they bring this knowledge back there. So I'm going to wrap this up now and say that what do I want to take away from this? Or what would I want the layperson to take away, or the scientist, or the chemical engineer? I would say understand the importance of not disturbing our etheric home. We live in an ether that is set in a beautiful resonant pattern. It may not last forever, but we can go a long way into preserving its beautiful, beautiful harmonic tone by not disturbing that tone. Don't be the cat that puts his paw on the ringing bar and causes it to mute, destroying all of space-time. You know, don't be that cat. Don't be blowing up bombs. We've already damaged it enough. If this was the length of the universe, by blowing up the bombs that we've blown up, we've already caused it to start to decay, and now the length of our universe is a lot shorter. What are you going to do? Blow up the last bomb and have it just stop? I mean, I can see it now mathematically. Now I understand why it's important, not just for our own little petty world, which is actually grand and beautiful and unique, but not just for that, not just for our small petty realm, which is actually a beautiful, awesome realm that deserves to be saved, but for all the realms. How do we know that the realms above us and below us are even more beautiful and wonderful? And all the information of the universe that's stored there would be lost forever. And so that's what I take away from this, number one. And number two is that we need to be open to the other entities around us. Okay? Some people might want to call them angels. The good ones are angels. And the ones that are harmful, that cause dissonance, that cause the vibratory patterns to lessen and mute the vibrating tube of beautiful music, mute it more and more, those would be called, I say, devil or demonic. And those are the ones you want to avoid. You want to prolong life and allow life to exist. And we want to be grateful for what we do have and not go around destroying it, when it's so simple to just realize, don't blow up stuff, you know, and maybe don't continue doubling the energy of the Hadron Collider, because even at those small scales, you're causing disruptions in the ether, which destroys the realms above and below us. And this is why we are seeing in the news more and more disclosures of aliens among us, because they don't want to be destroyed by humans, by the ignorance of humans. And so if we would have a little bit more reverence for the soup that we swim in, that's what I want you to take away. And that's what I take away from this. And I am in awe of the grandiosity and the beauty of our universe, and the interconnectedness of not only ourselves with each other, but of ourselves with all the beings above and below us. So may our world exist as long as possible. May we have as long of a life as possible, and may we be able to be here so that we can share love and share joy and share love with all the creatures around us, including our wonderful, wonderful loving pets that we love, And Linda Moten Howe made me realize how awesome it is to share our pets with our viewers, because they really give so much beauty and wonder to our lives. And I would hate to think that if space-time ended, I wouldn't be here to pet my darling, darling kitty cat, and my darling, darling husband, my darling children. I don't want to lose that. Peace, everybody. Have a glorious day.